Sorry.
Oh, the Director of Strategic Initiatives here at the Bipartisan Policy Center, and I am honored to be joined today by former Congressman and former Mayor of Dallas, Steve Bartlett.
Go Cowboys.
Yes, go Cowboys, who I understand is going to win the Super Bowl this year.
That's what we all understand.
Don't tell my husband, the Ravens fan, that. But Congressman Bartlett has served on our Executive Council of Infrastructure for the past 2 years. The council came together to answer the big question of how do we get more private investment into public infrastructure. They've come out with a report with a number of recommendations, and with the president-elect proposing tax credits to fund infrastructure, where the council is very well positioned to help further this discussion in the new Congress and new administration. So we just wanted to talk to you a little bit about infrastructure and how to get this moving.
And we should perhaps start by saying infrastructure is kind of that big $3 word. It really means highways and bridges and water and waste treatment and ports and all that stuff, that stuff that allows goods to flow, people to get where they're going, and the transporting the goods to where they need to get, that basically makes the economy work.
Right.
So without good, efficient infrastructure, the economy just kind of slowly slows down until it eventually stops. So we got to get there before it stops. Although it is slowing as a result of the lack of infrastructure.
And that's exactly right. We do define infrastructure quite broadly. We have found that when you start these conversations, you end up in a conversation about roads and bridges, but it is, as the Congressman mentioned, much
transmission
broader
lines,
than that.
electric transmission lines. Yeah.
And all of those form the backbone of the economy. So you're a former mayor and a former congressman.
But I'm okay now, so.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about, you had just alluded to this, why is infrastructure so important?
Well, infrastructure are the logistic connections that allows people and goods to go from one place to another efficiently. It is what makes everything else work. So if you unload a load of shoes on a bar at a port, you have to get it into the port, you have to get it unloaded, you have to get it onto the trucks, the trucks have to get out of the port, and then they have to get on the highway and take them to Dallas or to Duluth or to Columbus. And if that takes 7 days, and it should take 3 days, then that adds to the cost of shoes and also affects the economy in a negative way. Now that's a very small example. The bigger examples are everything else, whether it's cars or whether it's exporting or importing, everything else. If the infrastructure is not efficient and productive and uncongested, then everything slows down. One example: there's a highway I-35 between Dallas and Austin.
Yep.
And it should require a commuter in reasonable, even stopping for a cup of coffee, to take about 4 hours. But a typical trip these days is about 7 hours.
Wow.
Well, if you have 130,000 people a day, adding 3 hours per trip to their cost, the cost to the economy, and this is just dead weight cost, is just enormous. So it's breaking through those log jams. That is what the infrastructure project is about.
So we're seeing in the past, and you can speak to this as a Republican former member of Congress, infrastructure was a bipartisan issue.
Right.
Generally, you got both sides supporting it. We're hearing now a little bit about how Democrats are concerned that the private aspect of it, a big part of our report, is focused on corporate welfare. You have Republicans concerned about the cost. So how do we keep this bipartisan? How do we keep this train moving, so to speak?
Well, it is bipartisan. It's still bipartisan. You know, you have legislative details on how to get there, and that's where it's not really partisan. It's just how to get there. So the key is to keep focused on the public benefits. To keep focused on if a community needs 3 bridges for the adequate flow of goods and they only have 1, then the public benefit of adding those other 2 bridges, the public benefit of a water supply that is safe. Okay, so if you keep it focused on the public benefit, then the political class, the Congress and the administration, will figure out a way to solve it. There is a big role for the private sector, for example. The role is both financing, its design, its construction, and in many cases the operation of the ports or the roads or such can better be done by the private sector. But you ought to make those decisions on a case-by-case basis. It's not always best for the private and always best for the public. Usually it's a combination. I think the Congress and the Trump administration can easily get there if they focused on the benefit to the public.
Great, that's great. So what do you think are some guiding principles for this upcoming legislation? Obviously it's got to have public and a private piece.
Sure. Well, and I think it is upcoming. So first of all, it is bipartisan. The Trump administration is high priority of theirs. The Democrats in Congress, the Republicans in Congress, and the mayors and the governors. And I think it's really #1 priority for the people as a whole, because people are the ones being hurt.
Right.
It's not the political class. So what are the principles? One is the urgency. We have about a 15-year backlog nationally. It may be, it's bigger than that in some areas, but it's at least 15 years because the country's been focused on other things. So number one, get started. Number two, it is about jobs, but it's not about construction jobs. Construction jobs will come as a result of it, and that's great, but it's really about the long-term jobs by adding to the economy. And three is to streamline the regulations. So it's not so much that any one regulation impedes it, it's that the regulatory structure requires right now you to go one regulation at a time. So you apply for this permit, and it takes 2 years, full stop, and then apply for the next permit, and that takes 3 years, full stop, and then 2 years for another one. So it's an average of about 7 regulatory permits per project, okay? And if they each take 2 years, then you start 15 years behind and you end up 29 years behind. The Bipartisan Policy Center has a terrific idea, and that is to parallel the regulations. So apply for the permits in parallel as opposed to in sequence. That sounds pretty easy, and it is pretty easy. You just have to have the political will to do it.
Great. So on the issue of the private, you had mentioned the political risks and such. What are some of the other reasons they're not? There's money now in pension funds and such. Why is it that they're not stepping up?
Well, the private sector is stepping up, but not as much as we need. So first is sometimes the private sector gets sort of pushed aside as if it's about them, but it's not. So I think both the private companies as well as the public officials need to always start with a benefit. The cost of getting from Richmond, Virginia to Washington, D.C. in an efficient manner. The delays out of the Long Beach port, which are now just of staggering proportion, not because the goods aren't coming and going, but the infrastructure is not there to get them off the boats and get them onto the interstate highway system. So keep it on the public benefit, not to the benefit of the private companies. Private companies will do fine, they'll bid on it, it'll be competitive, and they'll do fine, and they should. It's not about them, it's about the public as a whole. So #1, public benefit. Number two is this streamlined regulation. So the private companies, unlike the government, just simply cannot stand an unexpected delay. They can price in a 7-year delay if it's going to be 7 years, but if they price in a 7-year delay and it's a 15-year delay, they go broke. And if they go broke, the public loses because they don't get the bridge. So it's getting the certainty of a streamlined regulation. I'll give you one example out of Dallas. Some years ago, and I was in Congress at the time, sort of peripherally involved, Dallas had one of our claim to fame. We had the most congested urban highway in America, which was called Central Expressway, and it's hard to believe that we could be. We took that honor. It's called Central Expressway.
Okay.
And so the state, the local, the city decided to fix it, so they got it all designed, and then they realized if they build it using the typical federal, state, local partnership, it would take them 20 years perhaps to get it finished, and that's a long time, and also double the cost. Okay. On the other hand, if they build it with all local money, it took 8 years. I mean, it's a staggering difference. This is not. I'm not bashing on the federal government. I'm just saying if you have sequential permitting, that's what happens. So the state of Texas and the city of Dallas built it with all local money, had it up and running in 8 years, and as a result, from the cost savings and from the extra boost to the economy by building it early, it paid for itself really quickly. And it was private. It wasn't even a toll road. You can do it even more with a toll road.
Okay, so how do we, so while this larger debate is going on in Congress and the administration, what could be done at the local level? What can they do to, while we're waiting for that?
As a mayor, I'm a great believer that cities can design and can drive their own destiny. So mayors understand this really well, that they have this huge problem, and their people are the ones that are suffering. The national government doesn't suffer, it just languishes the economy. But that's in a city, that's one person at a time, and that's real money, and that's real pain and suffering. So the first thing a mayor can do is to inventory your assets. That's different than inventorying your needs. Figure out what you've got that you can convert into filling the need. So what cities have, they have airports which have revenues. They have toll roads which have revenues. They have ports that have revenues. They have private companies that have revenues. They oftentimes have a business infrastructure that's willing to provide some of the soft costs. They also have kind of boots on the ground understanding what the exact needs are and how to manage the permit process, okay? Mayors have at least the moral authority to put a deadline on permits, to sort of pronounce, maybe not statutory authority, but a mayor could pronounce, he said, okay guys, everybody's got 2 years to get all the permits done. Start, okay? And it puts a certain urgency into it. So first, survey your assets. Secondly, we had in Dallas, I started off, we had this huge problem of vacant lots that have been foreclosed on for tax liens over the course of 30 years in the city of Dallas. And when I came in as mayor, we still had them, 40,000 of them.
Wow.
Okay? And of course, City Hall had always used them as a problem because they're a liability, because you have to mow them and they're trashy and all that stuff. And I said, wait a minute, but it's also, we call it real estate in the private sector. So we sold them off. Some of them we sold for $1, right? And it converted them into an asset. Some of them we converted into parks. We needed parks, so we had land for parks. So look at your assets. Secondly is survey your most urgent needs. Make sure it's multimodal, so you don't build a bridge that doesn't have a highway on both ends, okay? Make sure it's multimodal, but then survey your needs, and then start to rank the needs. Here are the top 10, here are the next 10, and so forth. And then third is go out and look for the resources, the financial resources, to fund those needs. Sometimes it's a toll road. Sometimes it's a private corporation. So if it's a toll road, by the way, best is always to have a private company operate it because they're more efficient at it. Sometimes it's what's called a TIF, a tax increment financing, which most cities have and they can create, where you say, okay, what are the property taxes we're collecting now at this location? If we build this bridge, what will the property taxes be then? Take the difference and back it up and capitalize it and sell bonds against the difference. You know, that sounds so easy because it really is easy. You just have to have the political will to do it. I mean, no mayor has ever run on a campaign platform of I promise to give you TIFs, tax increment financing, because it sounds bad. But it's really just simply taking the tax revenue you're going to get in the future and backing it up and spending it now in order to get the tax revenue. So those are you can even do naming rights. So all the stadiums, of course, have learned that pretty well. But there are other naming rights that you can do. All of them, they get controversial, so I won't mention the specific ones. But we have in Dallas, we needed a new tiger enclosure for our zoo for endangered tigers. Okay, and we didn't have it, and we were literally going to have to euthanize our tigers because we couldn't take care of them humanely. And so Exxon stepped up, Exxon Corporation, and paid for the new exhibit, and so of course we named it the Exxon Tiger exhibit. Okay? The tigers are saved, the public gets a new exhibit on endangered tigers, and Exxon gets the signage. It's actually not that complicated, you just have to think outside the box.
So do you think, because one of the issues we hear is, you know, I know private capital is interested in being there, but the municipalities don't have the capacity. Like you clearly did as mayor, you kind of understood how to bring in that private capital. And I know one of the things that BPC's council is focused on is how to get that capacity at the local level.
It's really the will, it's not the capacity.
Okay.
All the cities have the capacity, the physical capacity, if they link their assets to their needs. If they say, this is what kind of a tax base we have, and double that, this will be the tax base we're going to have if we build these projects, and then you then take that difference and you capitalize it back into bonds. So I see it as more the political will than the actual financial capacity. That is not to say it's not pie in the sky. You can't outrun your skis. Okay, you can only build what you can afford, but you can afford it a lot more than you think. A lot more than you have in your checkbook right now. Flint, Michigan, classic example. They went exactly the reverse. They said, well, gosh, we don't have the money to repair our water mains, and so we'll just put in toxic water, and that's cheaper. In the long run, is a lot more expensive. So had they solved the problem initially, then it would have saved them and all of us billions of dollars by providing for the health costs of of toxic water. But you have to decide to do it.
Right.
And then you have to finance it using the benefits. Keep it focused on the benefits, and then finance it from the additional economic value of those benefits.
Great. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you so
Well,
much.
before we have one more
Yes.
thing to do, and that is to my friends on Facebook, Merry Christmas.
Yes.